In today's video, I'm going to be going over a huge list of staple cards and talking about whether or not you should be playing them in the current metagame. I'll tell you guys exactly what cards you should or shouldn't be playing, so without any further ado, let's hop straight into it. I'm going to start off with the going first cards for the first half of this tier list, then move on to going second staple cards, and keep in mind that this doesn't include hand traps because I have a separate video on those, so if you haven't checked that out, be sure to do so. It's already up on my channel, and you'll see it on the top right of your screen right now. So starting off with Call by the Grave. Call by the Grave is definitely a format staple. Great going first, even has some applications going second into a deck like Blue Eyes because they stuff like Spirit and Heraldic Seals tributes themselves for a cost. Not much to really say about this. This card should probably be in everyone's deck, main deck if not side deck. Next out is Crossout. I think Crossout's a solid pick. You definitely don't have to play this even though we are in a hand trap format. But for the most part, I think that the big decks like Raziel and Malice should be playing this in their side deck because there are quite a few blowout hand traps that are good against both of those decks. Next up is Daruma Cannon. I think Daruma Cannon is pretty niche. I would probably use it as a triple tactics thrust set, and it can be pretty decent against like a deck like Malice because you're able to send their stuff to the graveyard and book their non-link monsters, making it difficult for them to continue playing. And I think against Raziel, it could be okay once they put 2 level 4s on the board, but I don't think it's going to be high impact enough in either of those matchups to really be super incredible. There are just some other crazy Floodgate normal traps right now that you could be setting instead, with a card like Trap Trick or with a card like Thrust instead, so I don't think that Daruma Cannon is that great, but that being said though, it is probably okay to play. Next up is Shared Ride. I think Shared Ride's also pretty niche. I don't think there's a deck I want to side this in against off the top of my head that's like at the forefront of the metagame. Like against a deck like Raziel, it's cool, I guess, you'll get a few draws, but I think you generally would rather play like actual interruptions to stop your opponent instead of hoping to draw into hand traps with these. It's probably a pretty niche pick. It may not, maybe even like meh, probably not even that good. Next up is Dimensional Fisher. I think Dimensional Fisher is also like fairly niche. Very few decks can play this. Like off the top of my head, I guess like Stun and Ritual Beast. So right off the bat, not many decks are going to be able to have access to this. I think it can be okay against a deck like Raziel, and it's solid against the Fiendsmith engine, but it doesn't do anything to Malice at all. So I don't think that this is going to be a very popular, nor is it going to be a very strong pick in this current format. Next up is Lullaby of Obedience, and I actually think this is a pretty sleeper card right now. There are going to be a lot of mirror matches right now between Malice and Raziel, and I think that being able to have an extra piece of consistency is something that can be kind of nice. I don't think we'll see play in every single deck right now, but I feel like it's a card that actually has some potential because in the past we've seen this card be good in like close to tier 0 formats like with Zodiac back in the day, and I think that Raziel falls in a similar boat. Next up is Grave of the Super Ancient Organism. I don't think this card is really doing anything in this format. It doesn't really hurt any of the top decks and is really only a very niche Floodgate that's good against very specific like rogue decks. So I don't think that this card is really worth talking about at all. Similar case with Magic Deflector. It's just not that great of a Floodgate right now. I don't think there's that many quick play spells, equip spells, or field spells that are super important that need to resolve. So I don't think that this card is very good. I think Dimensional Barrier is a format staple. It's very good against Raziel and has a lot of coverage into a bunch of the other rogue decks as well. So I don't think there's too much to talk about there. It is one of the few cards that's a complete blowout against a deck like Raziel, and this card probably should be in everyone's side decks. Now I also do want to quickly touch on Mischief of the Gnomes. This is another option that I have been trying, and I think that Mischief of the Gnomes is actually something that could potentially see play over Dimensional Barrier, specifically because Raziel is the main deck that you're targeting with these types of cards. And going up against a deck like Raziel, which should have plenty of room for non-engine, you may not be able to kill them after shutting them out for a single turn. Having that extra turn skip in your graveyard, I think, is pretty important, and I feel like actually has a ton of value in this current format. So I think that Mischief of the Gnomes is something you guys can definitely try. You won't be able to cover as many decks as Dimensional Barrier, but I think it can be a little bit better against Raziel. Next up, Monster Floodgates, being like Rivalry, Goes In, and There Can Be Only One. I think that Rivalry is very niche. It's not going to do anything to Malice. Against Raziel, I suppose it's fine. It'll shut out the feature part of their deck, and they're a mix of Pyros and Thunders, so it can be pretty annoying for them to deal with. But I don't think that too many decks are going to be wanting to play this right now. Similar case with Goes In match, like it does nothing against Malice, and against Raziel, maybe because they have Fires and Lights, but I don't feel like these are just high impact enough to be played in the current format. But then TCB on the other hand, I actually think can be a decent choice, specifically because it's so good against Malice. They don't really have in-engine ways to out it, whereas something like Yugioh, for example, even if you flip up one of these floodgates against them, X can just send Meteorologic Aggregator can negate the floodgate and sort of nullify it, but Malice just doesn't have that consistent in-engine way to actually deal with TCB. So I think that TCB is actually a pretty solid pick. It shuts out Malice pretty well and can be pretty annoying for some Fiendsmith decks as well. So I think that this is something that if your deck can play, it's something worth considering. Next up is Deck Lockdown. I think that Deck Lockdown is also a fairly solid floodgate. There are quite a few effects that special summon from deck, like thinking of cards like TB11, Ice Yugioh. There is a bunch of searching even in the Malice and Yugioh decks right now. So I think that this floodgate is something that could potentially shut out a lot of those strategies. The only problem is, since it is a hand trap format, you're not always going to be able to just activate this and win on the next turn, because your opponent will likely have hand traps to be able to stop you, and this card may hinder your own plays as well. So this is something to be aware of if you do choose to play this card, but I feel like this card has a ton of potential this current format. Next up is Mistaken Arrest. I think that Mistaken Arrest falls in a similar boat as Shared Ride. I don't really think stopping searching matters that much for most of the top decks. I'm sure they can still play their decks fine without searching. It'll be a little annoying, but if a card like Droll isn't doing that much to them, like a card like Mistaken Arrest isn't going to do that much to them either. Next up is Salesman. I think this card is awful and just shouldn't ever be played over Crossout. Next up are the Solemns. Solemn Strike, I will say, is definitely a format staple. It's a great card in the side deck that's good against pretty much every single matchup. Almost always be like a 2-for-1 trade at least. Think about like your opponent committing 2 monsters to an XD summon, or your opponent committing 2 or 3 monsters to a Link summon. Just striking the summon can be really powerful. Not to mention, if games do drag on a little bit longer, this card can start hitting key hand traps like Nibiru as well. And I think that that sort of flexibility for Solemn Strike is just something that's super powerful. It's just a crazy way to back up whatever end board you're already making anyways. And it makes it so, in a very simplified game state, your opponent's probably not going to get much going either. So I think that overall Strike is something that should be in most people's side decks, especially if you're choosing not to play like the Thrust package with the one with 3 thrusts and like 1 copy of like a Floodgate trap. I feel like Judgment is a little bit under Strike just because a lot of the top decks don't really have like blowout spells and traps they care about too much. It's not like either of them are trying to like set 5 cards and protect themselves from a card like Evenly or Duster. While Judgment is still a very solid card, I think that Strike's just going to get a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more value this format. So I would put Solemn Judgment in solid pick, whereas Strike I think is definitely one of the staples in this current format. Next up is Imperial Iron Wall. This is of course a very powerful floodgate against Malice. If you really want extra copies of cards to stop Malice, I suppose it's a decent pick. Malice, again, doesn't have an in-engine way to out this most of the time. It can be really annoying. Like, if you think about cards like Lancia and Chaos Hunter, their engine sometimes has outs to it. Like, you can make a card like Cerberus to out Chaos Hunter. Your opponent sometimes might have Call By or Cross Out for Lancia. Whereas with Iron Wall, most Malice players are not siding in spell and trap removal against most decks, so I think that Iron Wall, you could get away with resolving Iron Wall and have it be really good. Next up is Black Goat Last. I think this is also a very niche pick for this current format. I would never choose to play this card as like a quote-unquote blowout to set with Thrust, or as 3 or like side in 3 copies for certain matchups. I don't think this card is good enough for that. But that being said though, there are a few key cards you can call with the Black Goat Last at the moment. So cards like Malice Q Whitebinder, cards like Yugioh Detonator or Yugioh Duo Drive can be fairly high impact when you call them. But that being said though, I don't think this card will ever be enough to stop an opponent's turn in their tracks. So I think overall, maybe if your deck's playing a bunch of traps, otherwise I don't think this card's just worth it. Next up is Spellbound. I don't think Spellbound is very good at the moment. Formats where Spellbound is good, I think, are where you can get value from it, both going first as a Floodgate and going second to stop cards like the Pearly Rank Up trap or like IP Masquerena, but those just aren't very prevalent in the current format today, so I don't think that this card's great. Next up, I guess, are Skill Drain and Power Sink Stone. These are still very powerful Floodgates, but then again, like, not every deck's going to be able to play them, so I'll put them in niche pick, not because they're bad, but I just think that a lot of decks are not going to be able to take full advantage of this. A deck like Blue Eyes can probably play it fine, and it'll be really strong there, but you can't really play this in too many other decks, so I feel like it's going to be pretty niche overall. Next up is Anti-Spell. I think Anti-Spell is okay. Like, it's still, most of the top decks do play a fair number of spells, and even though this Floodgate is still at 1, I think that if you do want a high impact Floodgate that's good against a lot of decks, Anti-Spell could be one of those you go for. Next up is Heatwave. I don't think Heatwave is very good. Tenpai is not really prevalent right now, so I don't think that this card will really ever see play. Next up, I guess, are the two viruses. These cards also don't really see too much play, and I think the only deck that could realistically take advantage of this is Malice, because they are the ones that are able to consistently put the required material on the board. I guess maybe a card like Deck Devastation has like some potential against Yugioh. Their monsters are pretty small, but it's not like the deck has no ways around this. And a card like Eradicator, while it's still powerful, I think monsters are just way more prevalent in today's top decks. So I think that these two are just going to be very niche picks, like at the bottom of the niche, like top of meh. I don't want to discount these entirely, because I think that there are going to be some matchups where these cards are very high impact, and you could theoretically play this in Malice and have it be decent, but I don't think that they're consistently good enough to go higher than niche. Unending Nightmare is not very good right now. Not too many face-up continuous walls or traps to really hit. DDG, I think, is a decent pick. I think it's good against all the rogue decks, of course. It's, I guess, usable against Yugioh. It's not great against them, but it's not like it'd be completely dead against them, because it does turn off a card like X, and it does make a card like Node get less value. So I guess it could be okay in most cases, but I think generally if you want a normal trap that gives you all the coverage you need, Dimensional Barrier is probably just that trap. Next up is Silent Graveyard. This card also isn't very good right now. Aren't too many graveyard-centric decks aside from Fiendsmith, but I don't think that this card is worth citing just for those decks. So next up, Simul Archfiends. I guess I should have talked about this when I talked about Dimensional Barrier, but I think that Simul Archfiends is kind of a step below that. I'd probably put it at the top of niche. Against a deck like Malice, I suppose it can be nice. It prevents them from link climbing, and it will generally be pretty detrimental to that strategy. So in some sense, it's like a D-barrier for Malice, but against a deck like Yugioh, they can't just play off of a single Xyz monster. They can essentially even go Duo Drive, search a card like Node, special it, and then remove the Duo Drive from the board to bring back another guy to make Detonator. So in essence, like, this card won't do anything against Yugioh, but I suppose it has some applications against Malice, which is why I'll put it in niche. And then next up, for the going second part of this tier list, all these cards you see here are cards I generally consider for going second, although some of them do have applications when going first. First card is Lava Golem. I think that Lava Golem is also a very niche pick at the moment. Most end boards are going to have 2+ monsters, but once again, like, how many decks are realistically going to be able to play this? Maybe like the slower stun decks like Labyrinth or like Runic Stun could play it. If you're playing a deck like Malice or Yugioh, it's never worth sacrificing your normal summon for this. And I think Santa Claus and Sphere Mode fall in a similar category as this. Just these contributing to remove monsters from the board just aren't super good right now, especially if you consider how much recursion from the graveyard a deck like Malice has with GWC, and how much recursion a card like Eclipse Twins gives the Yugioh deck. Even if you tribute their boss monsters, they have a way to bring them back, so I don't think that these cards are very good right now. And I guess Kirikara falls in a similar boat as well. I don't think this is the format for these cards right now. Maybe there's a few decks they're playable against, and maybe a few decks will want to side cards like this because they don't have enough room to play hand traps. But outside of that very specific case, I don't think that it's worth talking about these at all. Next up are Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse. I think that both of these are fine, but they're still pretty niche. I feel like as board breakers, they're not that good. One, because they don't do anything to the Malice end board, but two, even against a deck like Yugioh, with the introduction of Eclipse Twins, they do have a easy way to get around these 1-for-1 board breakers. I think that, of course, if they don't have access to Eclipse Twins, if you hand trap them somehow, I think that these cards can be very good. So I could see these finding success in a very heavy hand trap deck like Pure Yugioh, where it can be used defensively going first, and going second, it can sometimes be good into certain boards. But outside of that specific case, I think that they're just higher impact and more consistently good cards that you should be playing instead. Next up for the spell and trap removal, I think that Harpy's Feather Duster and Lightning Storm are pretty solid picks right now. Even though back row isn't super popular, people have been incorporating cards like Solemn Strike, and people might have some nonsense Floodgates in their back row as well, so I think that having access to this in your side deck is still fairly important. I generally would go for 1 copy of Duster if I'm playing 3 copies of Thrust, and if I'm not playing any copies of Thrust, even considering 1 Duster, 2 Storm can be pretty solid, just so you don't get wrecked by those like random rogue decks or random Floodgates you run into. Twin Twister is just not very good right now. I don't think that you ever want to discard one to do the same things that cards like Duster or Lightning Storms are already able to do. Cosmic also is pretty niche right now. It's not like prior formats where we had like Snake Eyes and Yugioh, where this card was very impactful against their key continuous spells and field spells. This format, there just aren't really any like key continuous spells that you really want to hit. So I think that it's probably just a very niche pick that might have some applications against a deck like Runic, for example. But outside of that, I don't think this card is very good at the moment. Board breakers like Raigeki and Dark Hole, once again, is also very, very niche. Like, you would play this in, like, I guess a blind second deck of some sorts if you're playing like Tenpai still. I could see these being fine, although board breakers like this especially just aren't super impactful in my opinion, and won't consistently be good enough to warrant seeing play. Next up are Thrust and Talents, and I think these two are definitely format staples. First off, Talents, pretty obvious. There is a bunch of hand traps running around at the moment, so Talents has a very high chance of being live during your very first turn, and going second does give you some maneuverability into an already established board. So I think that it's good both going first and going second. So Talents definitely is something I would consider as a format staple. Thrust, on the other hand, I think is a little bit less of a popular pick, but I personally feel like Thrust should slowly start coming back into people's decks now, especially with the advent of all these hand traps. Going first, Thrust is just a super big blowout, being able to search a Floodgate whenever you get hand trapped, and if you don't get hand trapped, every single competent deck is going to put up a board that's pretty much unbreakable anyways. So Thrust has good applications there when going first. Going second, being able to search blowout cards like Talents and Dusters is something that's really valuable as well. So I would definitely not underestimate Thrust, even though it has fallen out of favor a bit recently. I think that this card is definitely still worth playing. Next up is Ultimate Slayer. I think that Ultimate Slayer is actually a really solid pick still. It is one of the few board breakers that does get around Eclipse Twins because they can't respond to it. And being able to send Mirror Logic Aggregator to negate Rizio Cross is still something that's really strong. Discarding as Malice as well could be decent. You could, if you do choose to play a Link monster that has an effect, you can not only remove a card like the Griffin or the Abao, it's almost like a 1-for-2 in most cases, where like you'll get one extra card out of that trade. And I think that this type of board breaker is one of the few ones that can still work in this current format. There are a few limitations with this, however. One of the key things this card can't do is out a card like Desiree, because it is going to have sequence attached most of the time. So that's something that to keep in mind. You won't be able to out Desiree. You will be able to out key end board threats like Rizio Detonator most of the time. So I think that this is a pretty solid pick still. The only thing I think that's holding it back a little bit compared to our next card, Metaltronus, is that it is a normal spell. You are pretty limited in when you're able to use it. Next up is Metaltronus. I think Metaltronus is definitely still a format staple. This card is so good against both Rizio and Malice. I don't really think there's too much to talk about there. You can either get yourself a free body, or you can just completely trade 1-for-1 with one of their key end board pieces. Not to mention, there are even generic cards you can hit like the Bystials, because people are playing that a lot. So I think that Metaltronus is something that definitely should be seeing a lot of play right now, and it's definitely something I would consider putting into my main deck if you have the ability to play this card. Next up is Fenrir. I think Fenrir is also pretty niche. I don't think it's a very good board breaker right now. It doesn't really do too much to most end boards. Maybe if your deck can benefit from the extra body and the search that it provides, it can be useful, but outside of that, I don't think it's very good right now. And Pankratops, I think, is just a step below Fenrir right now. There isn't any real reason to play Pankratops, in my opinion, when you have all these other high impact cards up here. Next up is Evenly. I think Evenly is also a pretty niche pick. It can be good against certain rogue matchups, as Omni Negates are few and far between, and even hypothetically against a deck like Malice, it can be fine, because Malice just doesn't have an Omni Negate on their end board. But despite all that, I think if you let your opponents go that far to build their board in the first place, most players are going to have a solid amount of follow-up for the next turn, which they're getting to because you're going through your battle phase. Or they can keep cards that have so much value on their own that it's just not really worth it. Like if you think about a Malice end board, how much a single GWC summoning back a Whitebinder can do, or how much a single Detonator on the board can do, I feel like Evenly Matched just isn't going to be good enough in those cases. Next up is Forbidden Droplet. I think that Droplet is also a decent pick right now. Most decks have chosen to opt to not play this because they are playing a high number of hand traps, and I would say that's fair. Like I think the card is still very good. And its flexibility as a quick play spell means you can use it like mid-chain, you can use it during damage step, you can use it both during your turn and your opponent's turn, and I think that's really important to have in a card. in your deck, so I think that it is a solid pick overall, although it probably leans more towards niche because you would probably just rather play extra copies of hand traps. Next up is Super Poly. I think Super Poly is also a very niche pick. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a super great Super Poly target that hits every single deck. Like, I'm sure there are Super Poly targets that are usable against decks like Yugioh and Malice, but I think that just even removing 2 monsters from the board just sometimes isn't even enough against those decks. Crazy enough to say. Because like a card like Yugioh Detonator with Eclipse Twins is just going to summon itself back. Against a deck like Malice, they have a bunch of recursion off a single copy of GWC into Whitebinder. So I don't think that Super Poly's that great right now. Next up is Herald of the Abyss. This card isn't worth playing at all. There are no towers-like monsters in the format right now. Forbidden Chalice is also, like, I want to just say meh. I'll put it in a niche pick, I guess. Like, the fact that you can use it during damage step is kind of cool. It's almost like a budget version of Forbidden Droplet, I suppose. It fulfills, like, similar roles. It gives you that flexibility of being used going first as an interruption or going second to trade 1-for-1 with your opponent. I suppose that could be fine. You can use it mid-chain as well, I guess. You can stop a card like Whitebinder when Whitebinder gets summoned out on your turn. I think that's something that's not to be underestimated, although I think that this card just isn't high impact enough to really be warrant playing right now. Next up is Dark Ruler, and I'd say Dark Ruler is also like fairly niche. I guess Dark Ruler can be decent against a deck like Yugioh, depending on what they end on. Most of the time, if you think about like a normal Yugioh end board, they could have something like Yugioh Detonator. They could have something with like Yugioh Cross, maybe some Fiendsmith stuff in there. But if they're playing like the pure version, it's just like Detonator backed up with a bunch of non-engine. I think in general, a card like Dark Ruler maybe can see play in certain decks. Like if your deck can't play that many hand traps and you have to let your opponent build a board, I suppose that Dark Ruler is serviceable. It'll trade with a majority of the interactions from your opponent most of the time. Although with a deck like Malice, for example, they will have traps in their back row that give them additional ways to keep playing. And most decks have a very high number of hand traps at the moment, so you will have to also deal with that non-engine as well. So I think that this is only very specifically for decks that can't really play hand traps and don't really have other choices. Next up are stealing cards like Change of Heart. Also very niche. I don't think this card is very good at the moment. I can't think of many situations where I'd want this over like even another 1-for-1 board breaker like Ultimate Slayer, for example. I just don't think that this card is really worth playing either. Next up is Enemy Controller. I think Enemy Controller goes at like the top of niche pick. It is a pretty hefty cost to tribute one of your monsters, but it does give you some ability to outplay your opponent in certain situations, dodging targeting effects. It does have the flexibility of being a quick play spell. You can use it when going first, you can use it when going second. So I guess in that case, it can fulfill a very specific niche for certain decks. Against a deck like Malice, if you're playing the Malice Mirror, you can rob one of their Link monsters and give yourself a Malice name, I guess. Like, I think it's fine, but there are probably just better cards up here. Like, I would probably pick Droplet over Controller if I had the choice. So Controller is something that's like has a cool effect, but I don't really think it should be seeing too much play right now. So that's going to do it for this giant staples tier list. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section below. Just remember, this is my opinion and my opinion only. I tried to cover as many cards as possible, so I did speed through a couple of them. But let me know if you think I missed anything or if you disagree or disagree with what I said. But with all that being said, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.